Well, maybe I'll start while they're moving the chairs to break the silence. Although I wanted to make an observation that I think there is a great energy in the room. They're very active listening, which is great to see. And I like the previous discussion where we could still discuss and learn new things and change our minds. So I think that's a part of learning experience. But also shows that CCS is a live industry now and growing very quickly. So it's great to see all these new people, new faces in the room. So this session, and I would like now maybe to invite the panelists here. We have enough chairs. So we'll focus on project developments in Europe. And I think we'll start. As we were speaking today already in the morning, that the momentum for CCS is growing really fast. This is exciting to see all the projects that are coming on board. Jared, our CEO, mentioned in his presentation that we add new CCS projects to our database every week. Right now we count 564 projects in various stages of development around the world. More than 170 of those are in Europe. So it's really exciting to see the momentum growing, the projects coming on board. We also learned this morning in a previous session that the business models are also changing for CCS. And as very early stages CCS, when I joined this field more than 10 years ago, we looked at CCS as a project, capture, transport, and storage. That was just one project. Now we see that value chain breaking into various service providers, providing capture technologies, providing storage services, and transportation services. So there's a lot of evolution in CCS. However, we also heard that word, however. There are some challenges on the road, and also the projects are not coming online as fast as we need them to be in order to meet our collective climate objective by 2030, and then 2040 and 2050. So today we have a great panel to examine a bit closer the situation with projects, the success stories, the challenges, the lessons learned, and the challenges that still need to be addressed going forward. So maybe we'll first ask our speakers to introduce themselves and organizations you represent, and then we'll start the discussion. So maybe I will introduce all of you, and then you can each take a turn. So today we have Nick Richardson from North Sea Authority from the UK with us. We have Dr. Sakura from Japan Oil, Gas, and Metal and Energy Security. We have Andrew Purvis from the World Steel, and Doris Becker, Director of Finance from Portus Project. So Doris, maybe you introduce yourself first, and then we'll go around.
Thanks. Yeah, good afternoon, and welcome to Rotterdam to all of you, the hometown of Portals. My name is Doris Bakker. I'm Director of Finance for the Portals joint venture. We are developing a transport and storage network for CO2 in the Port of Rotterdam and have actually just started construction. So very glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Nick.
Good afternoon. My name is Nick Richardson. I'm Head of Exploration and New Ventures at North Sea Transition Authority. As well as dealing with the decline of oil and gas in the UK North Sea, we're also dealing with carbon storage and hydrogen storage offshore. So we're the licensing and permitting authority for those activities, and fundamentally we're the technical competent authority for storage. So we're responsible for managing the storage portfolio, which will be across a number of decades. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
Hi, I'm Sakura Nishioka. I'm a representative of JOGMEC London office. It's my great pleasure to be a part of this panel. Thanks for the invitation. Let me just briefly speak about JOGMEC, who we are. We are a governmental organization under the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. Our principal aim is to secure stable supply of energy and mineral resources to Japan while contributing to establishing net zero society. In the field of CCS, we have several key functions, including providing subsidies and providing other kind of financial support like equity capital and loan guarantee to Japanese companies. And we also conduct feasibility studies around the world. And we also publish a sort of guidelines on CCS safety operation and calculation methods of carbon intensity of the products like hydrogen ammonia. And we also publish guidelines on CCS carbon credits. These initiatives are being on track in cooperation with domestic and international stakeholders. I'll be happy to take more questions later. Thanks.
Andrew.
I'm Andy Purvis. I'm Director Sustainable Manufacturing with the World Steel Association. World Steel is the global industry association for the iron and steel sector. So if you think of a steel company, they're probably a member of World Steel. We have members in all inhabited continents around the world. Our role really is to support our industry in helping itself, but also to talk about steel and the challenges of the industry and the product and the benefits of the product. So I'm delighted to be here today.
Yep. Thank you very much, all our speakers. Thank you for joining us today. So I'll start with questions to Doris about Porthos. Of course, we're all excited about Porthos. It reached the FID at the end of last year. Can you tell us a bit more about the journey that Porthos has been so far and what the project would mean for the CCS development in the Netherlands and probably beyond?
Yeah, sure. So basically, October last year was our FID moment, where our shareholders, Gasunie, EBN and Port of Rotterdam, decided to do it, to invest 1.3 billion euros in the Porthos infrastructure. We have had quite a long journey behind us. The project started in 2017 as an idea based on, well, the industrial cluster in Rotterdam that needs to decarbonize, where we still want to retain industry, but do it in a manner where we comply with Paris Agreement and the climate agreement of the Netherlands. So that's the main reason why Porthos exists, you could say. We see ourselves as paving the way from Porthos for obviously our own project, but also projects to come. We see the Aramis project that's basically following us a number of years behind, but that will also hopefully reach its FID in upcoming years. And then we see also large developments onshore taking place, where connecting the CCS infrastructure in Rotterdam to German, Belgium, France industrial clusters, and basically have the opportunity to also decarbonize those clusters there. And we really want to be the stepping stone for those projects coming after us. It's up to us to prove and to deliver that we can do it, and that the others hopefully follow soon, all with the ambition to achieve the climate agreement that we have in the Netherlands and in line with the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doris. And maybe I'll move to Nick with a follow-up question, because Doris spoke about one project, Porthos, and we all were following the story of Porthos, how it came about, and the licensing, the permitting stage. In the UK, you give licenses to, you have rounds of licenses. Can you speak a little bit about that and why you think that's more efficient, and how you are handling, multiple licenses at the same time?
That's right, yeah. So we ran a licensing round last year and added 21 licenses to our portfolio. So now we have 28 licenses across the UK offshore area, which I think it's fair to say is the largest set of licenses of any European country. Now, we did that in response to industry demand, so we're certainly seeing from the storage side that companies are wanting to exploit storage opportunities. But we're also seeing from an emitter perspective that emitters want to have line of sight to places where they can store their CO2. So there's the demand side, but also the fact that when you look at the government targets that have been laid out through the Committee for Climate Change in the UK, and you look at what can be delivered through the projects that we currently have on the drawing board, there's a gap that opens up in terms of what we need to store versus what we have the ability to store through the previous projects that we had. So we realised that we needed to add more licenses to the portfolio. Mm-hmm. Is it enough still? No, it's not. So when we look at the projections into the future of how much we can store through those projects, even if And I heard this kind of phraseology from our Norwegian colleagues earlier. Even if they all deliver as promised, they're still not going to meet the targets at some point from the 2030s onwards. And so we need to add more projects. But then when you add in some risk to that, so rather than taking an unrisked number, and I think we can get back to numbers later and what we're actually talking about, but when you add some risk to that, how many of those projects are actually going to make their way through? You realize that there's an even bigger gap. And so the question is, how many stores do you actually need to appraise? Now, there's an element of risk in this. There's an element of uncertainty. There's also the time element that we need to be aware of. And our perspective on this is we need to act as a partner, as a regulator to industry to get those projects delivered as efficiently as we possibly can. And so we have many, many learnings from the oil and gas industry in how to do that. We call that our stewardship process. We make sure there are milestones in the licenses, and we actually hold the hands of industry as we go through the process together. Part of that has been, after issuing those licenses, going through an early risk assessment process. And we're still part way through that process, but we have quite a few learnings in terms of the status of industry, where they are, understanding of risk in the portfolio, and how we can actually look at a very early stage of the license in terms of how we get from the beginning of the license, to the point of issuing a permit at the end of the day. And what are the things we need to do in a stepwise fashion to be able to de-risk those particular elements, and making sure that everybody is clear from an early stage what to do. So really what we're trying to do is kind of turn the flywheel. Little pushes in the beginning, get the momentum going to the point where these projects, either we're going to realize at an early stage that they're not going to fly, or we're going to make sure they have got the momentum such that when they approach the point of FID and issuing a permit, they're in a really good position to do that. And as they go into operations, we understand what could happen and what the scenarios are and what the mitigations are for those various risks that exist.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in parallel to Europe, CCS momentum is also growing in other parts of the world, including APAC and Japan. And we heard today already that Japan selected 7 projects.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit more about that? Which are those projects? Why you've selected them? What makes them interesting for you?
Sure. In order to meet our climate target, we need to store and capture 120 million tons to 240 million tons per year. And in order to realize that, our target is to start CO2 injection by 2030. So it means FID should be reached by 2026. So we have only 2 years to go. So this coming 2 years will be very important for Japan to boost CCS investment. And so Japanese government and the JOGMEC have selected 7 demonstration projects to kind of kickstart our CCS value chain. And the total amount of CO2 to be stored by the 7 projects is actually about 13 million tons of CO2 per year, which accounts for actually less than 2% of Japan's total CO2 emission, which is 1 billion tons of CO2 per year. So obviously, we will need much more CCS to meet our climate target, though. In this context, these 7 projects are sort of basis for future CO2 hub network creation, which would promote low carbon industry throughout Japan. What noteworthy about this initiative is, first of all, the location of emission sources and stretch areas of all the 7 projects are widespread geographically. And each of them have different types of CO2 sources, like paper plant, power plant, and cement, and so on. And each of them have different transportation methods, including pipeline and ship, and stretch types, onshore, offshore, nearshore. And I would say that most types of CCS projects are covered by this initiative. expect actually CDR done. So by promoting these projects, we will be able to identify the issues and challenges should be solved throughout the various types of CCS value chain, and selection criteria is not disclosed. However, of course, the contribution to Japan's NDC is very important.
So is it like a learning portfolio, those 7 projects?
Yes.
You want to learn. They're not going to be a commercial scale projects, or,
Yeah, of
or you are
course,
planning to have a commercial scale?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Thank you. And Andrew, so turning to the steel sector, of course, steel sector has multiple mitigation options available to it. We heard today in the morning about cement, where there are almost no other options, just CCS. For steel, there are other options, but at the same time, we know that blast furnaces will continue to play an important role in steel production. So can you say something about the role you envisage for CCS to play for the steel sector?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I mean, the steel sector is a 2 billion ton industry. At the moment, around about 3/4 of that is coming from the blast furnace. Blast furnace certainly aren't going anywhere in the short term. With 2 billion tons times 2 tons a ton, clearly you can see where the issue is and why our industry needs to decarbonize our emissions. I think there's a number of ways we can do that. Short term, we're going to be talking about efficiency. Medium term, using more scrap. Long term, though, we're getting to the space where we're talking about breakthrough technologies. And we need those kind of technologies to be available and deployed. There isn't a silver bullet. There will be hydrogen in the mix, certainly in Europe. There's a lot of development happening around hydrogen steelmaking. There's going to be CCS. There are other less mature technologies which are developing around particularly, issues like direct electrolysis or some other very exciting new technologies. But the reality is we're going to keep needing to use the blast furnace. Maybe in Europe we'll see the decline of the blast furnace sooner, but if you look around the world at where steel is made and will continue to be made, we make about 2 billion tons now. Approximately 250 million tons is coming out of the EU and America, where we were talking this morning around the clear policy framework and the pathway to decarbonize. Most of the steel in the world is coming out of Asia, particularly I think key geographies are China, India, where we're seeing a growth in production, and Southeast Asia. These regions have very young blast furnaces that are unlikely to be retired anytime soon. So these are the areas where we need to see CCS. I was looking at some projections for 2050 from these particular parts of the world, and there will be a portfolio of solutions used in all countries, and the proportion of each technology will depend on local conditions, resources. But if you look at China and India, we could easily see 25% of their capacity installed with CCS by 2050. To put that in number terms, you're talking about probably in China up to 150, 200 million tons, India 100 million tons. So there'll be more CCS in those countries than there is steel production in the EU and in the US. So CCS is, I think, going to be an essential part of the mix, and we need to get it deployed, demonstrated, and out there.
Right. Well, now I would like to focus a little bit more on challenges and difficulties. And my children didn't appreciate that feature when I focus on challenges and difficulties, but maybe for the sake of, in the professional space, it's more convenient. So Doris, Porter's project took a couple of years, from 2017 you said, we're in 2024. Can you list some of the main obstacles that the project faced, maybe technical, maybe policy related?
Yeah, sure. As you say, 7 years, so it took quite some time, and yes, we've had several challenges. I think a main one when we started was the fact that simply a business case for CCS was lacking. So when the project was initiated in 2017, the ETS price was at 20 euros per ton. So it simply was impossible to have a feasible business case without support. But that support, or at least the framework for support, was also lacking. So there was no subsidy system in place. while we had this strong targets of achieving CO2 emission reduction in the port in the Netherlands, in Europe already. So I think in the early years of the project, the main challenge on that was really focusing on getting a business case to a feasible level, having support from all entities that were involved there. So that's both the state-owned companies that are developing the infrastructure, it's the public authorities that had to come up with a way to subsidize the technique, basically. And it was also the industrial entities that had to commit to join forces with the state-owned companies and with the public authorities to getting it done. So that was really a major challenge early on in the project. After that, we've seen quite some other policy-related challenges. For example, in the Netherlands, in our system, CCS was still part of the waste tax levy. So basically, it was considered as waste dumping, and you had to pay a tax on that. At least that was in our system the case. So we had to solve that and get legislation in place so CCS was not considered as being part of the waste tax system. We finally managed to do that, but it also took quite some time to formally get it approved and done. And then in the end, I think the main challenge, the main reason why the project got delayed for quite some years was the fact that we have it took us a substantial period of time to get our permits for construction in place. And that mainly was due to the fact that there was no construction permit, or at least it was in court, because of the fact that we have a nitrogen emission issue in the Netherlands that basically made it very difficult for us to construct the project where limited amounts of nitrogen are being emitted in the construction phase. And we've had a court case running for 2 years to finally get an approval to continue and have our permits in place. So all in all, that was the main challenge hindering the project over the past 7 years, or at least from a timing perspective it was. And yes, there have been technical challenges, but the engineering teams that we have, and also the engineering teams of our clients, of the emitters, they have been really very well able to solve them and getting it done. So I would say the main challenges we have seen relate to this policy and governmental framework stuff that had to be sorted out, which also isn't strange for a first of its kind project, which we are.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think, I would like to maybe turn to Nick because they're issuing multiple licenses. You said 28 right now. What is the success rate that you expect? Will all of these projects materialize, or some of them will not? And also, maybe not talking about the UK in particular, but in general, as we heard, there are various challenges on the way, technical, sometimes policy-related. So not every CCS project that we currently see in our pipeline will actually become an operational facility, which is probably okay because that's the way it works with industrial facilities. Can you elaborate on that a little bit from your experience?
I can try, yes. So there's success rates at the project level and there's success rates at the portfolio level, and we don't have a particularly good handle on either of those things, to be honest, because we don't have the benefit of the history of delivery. So in the oil and gas industry, we have some reasonably good statistics that we can use, and we can say, well, okay, if you drill a well, then it's got an X% chance of success. But we can't quite do the same thing for carbon storage. So, the fundamental question for us as a regulator and as a government is, we have a set of targets. What's our confidence that we can actually meet those targets? And I've heard lots of numbers being talked about today, and we discussed this in the storage breakout session as well. We need to be clear about what the numbers actually mean. So when we're talking about a project is going to deliver X million tons per annum, what is that? Is that a P50 chance? Is that a P90? Is it a P10? How confident are we that we're going to meet our 2030 targets? Because I think there are some countries in the room where there's a 0% confidence. Some might be 100% confident, but are they really, and have you quantified it? How confident are we we're going to meet our 2050 targets? But then also, to get to the level of confidence you need, and bearing in mind that we have legally binding climate targets, if you want to get close to 100% confidence, what do you need to do in terms of appraisal? So do we know how many stores we need to appraise? Because for us, we're talking on the order of 100 stores going into the beginning of the maturation funnel, certainly. We know that number will be much less when it gets to operational sites, and it will decline over time as well. So we need to have a good handle on what we need to bring in to the beginning of the process and really focus on that appraisal cycle and how we can accelerate that appraisal activity. And that means investing into seismic and wells for stores that ultimately may not reach permit, but it's something that we need to do to be able to increase our confidence levels. Dynamic data for these storage sites. There are sites being developed where we haven't injected CO2 into the subsurface. We may have some understanding and some inference of what might happen from production histories, but there will be some sites where we have no dynamic data. We do not know how the CO2 will behave in the subsurface. We don't know how it will behave when it goes from gas phase into dense phase. We don't know quite how that will affect the overburden and fracturing of it, how it interacts with wells. So there are lots and lots of uncertainties. So as we go through this funnel of maturation, we need to consider all of the different risks, and I'm not using the term risk in terms of leakage, because I think in some people's minds I'm talking just about leakage. I'm talking about all the project risks. We may not even be able to get some sites into the portfolio funnel because of issues like co-location. This is a particular issue that we have in the UK. I know it applies to the Netherlands and to Denmark. There are areas that are inaccessible effectively because they may be assigned to other offshore users. When you go into the appraisal cycle, the main risk that we have for all of our projects is to do with well integrity, and typically legacy well integrity. And that's the thing that is going to make some of those projects fall away at a relatively early stage. And when those projects fall away, we need to make sure we don't replace them with other projects when we realize there's a problem. We need to have done it in advance because the maturation cycle is so long that you need to take that into account in advance. We need to anticipate the problems before they actually occur. And so one of my concerns is that some of these big projects that we're investing lots of money into now, we're doing it, but we're not really thinking about what might go wrong and what would we do to mitigate that and what are our alternative options. I think ultimately the solution is to manage the portfolio. It's the portfolio level, it's the interactions between stores, it's building networks, it's building in non-pipeline transport solutions. That's the way we end up with a system where we can balance the requirements of the emitters with the injection that we get at a store level and at a portfolio level. And if we keep going down the track of a set of emitters in a cluster to a set of stores in a relatively small area, then I think we're going to get into problems. The more dispersed we can get the network and the more we can cooperate with each other, I think the better the solutions ultimately will be, and the better we can take into account some of those uncertainties, because one thing you can bet on is we're going to have lots of surprises along the way, and we'd better be prepared for them.
Thank you very much for that. So what I get from what you just said, that having a portfolio approach would provide more certainty in achieving climate targets and actually having enough projects in the pipeline that actually do the job that the CCS is required to do.
Yeah, and it's like any portfolio, any investment portfolio you have. You
always
want
better
to spread
than
your bets,
single.
right?
Yeah.
But to make sure we spread our bets effectively, we also need to make sure that we cooperate and collaborate, and we anticipate and we build the structures both at a policy level and at an engineering level that will allow us to have that flexibility in the system.
Yeah, and that could also probably be advantages in terms of communicating that to the public, because sometimes when something doesn't go right, there is a lot of press. Oh, the project failed, or there are changes in decisions or construction or whatever. So if it's a portfolio approach and presented in that way, there's probably easier communication to the communities, to the public about CCS and the success of the portfolio rather than projects inside this portfolio.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you for this insight. Question, as is focusing on challenges, Andrew, for the steel industry, do you see a potential challenge for your for the members of your association in having lack of or no contact with oil and gas sector, with providers of transport and storage? Is it a challenge for you or not?
Look, I think it's an opportunity. I think you can reasonably look at the steel industry and say you need to develop capture. You need to, maybe not on your own, but with some of the other service providers, that there's a lot of them here. I think it's pretty reasonable to do that. But I think once you get to the other end of the chain and into storage, our industry doesn't understand the subsurface. We have no experience in the subsurface. You know, historically we've worked well within our value chain, from miners, steelmakers, customers. I think increasingly now we're broadening that out to more of like an ecosystem. So to succeed in the new world, decarbonized world, we'll need to work, I think, with stakeholders that we haven't really had to have relationships with before. These include certainly the oil and gas sector, who could play a role not only in developing and delivering storage infrastructure, because we need access to storage infrastructure. It's got to be there, it has to be reliable, in the right place, and at the right price point that we're able to use it. But the other option, I think, opportunity for oil and gas related to CCS is hydrogen. You know, if you look at Europe, you could be forgiven for thinking that hydrogen is the silver ticket, it's the golden bullet, it's going to fix all of our problems. And there will be a lot of hydrogen in Europe, but we do have to get access to it at the right cost. A lot of discussion now about electrolyzers and how we can get enough renewable energy to make hydrogen at sufficient volumes, at sufficient price, to be able to use it to make iron and steel. And we're starting to see that happen in parts of Europe where the conditions all line up perfectly. You know, blue hydrogen is the other option. It's been difficult in recent years, yes, with the oil gas price being where it is, but blue hydrogen is a genuine opportunity for the oil and gas sector, I think, to transition and supply other sectors, including iron and steel, who have a real need and desire for hydrogen, not only for hydrogen reduction, but we're looking at how we can use hydrogen in the blast furnace as part of a transition and in heating. But I think blue hydrogen is a great opportunity. So I think certainly the oil and gas sector have got a huge role to play in making the transformation in our industry possible. We can't do it on our own.
Right, so you brought us very well to the next topic of collaboration. So you mentioned, well, instead of seeing that as a challenge, collaboration with industries like oil and gas, it's an opportunity. And also, it's not only for CCS, but blue hydrogen and providing hydrogen to industrial facilities. I would like to turn to Sakura and ask about international collaboration.
Yeah.
We hear that Japan is establishing partnerships with other countries in Asia Pacific to maybe bring CO2 to other countries. Can you speak a little bit more about the international collaboration in the region?
Yeah, sure. Yes, international cooperation, especially on policy and institutional aspects, is one of the most important elements to complete this CCS puzzle, especially when it comes to cross-border CCS project. So for example, this January, we organized big workshop on CO2 cross-border transportation in cooperation with APAC stakeholders. As you know, many CCS projects would possibly require CO2 cross-border transportation. And we see 2 days ago, 5 European countries signed MOU with Norway for CO2 cross-border transportation, which is incredible milestone for Europe CCS development. And APAC countries, including Japan, would need similar agreement, which said, I would say, harmonized regulatory framework, such as like CO2 leakage responsibility and specification and accounting methodology of CO2 reduction amount and so on. But unfortunately, we have no umbrella institution like EU, so that makes it even harder to create harmonized regulatory framework. So we've been working on international cooperation, but we even need more and more international cooperation as we are actually getting closer to industrial implementation of CCS.
Yeah, thank you. And Darius, I have the same question for you. Did international collaboration already play a role for Portos, or not just international, whatever collaboration with other stakeholders, other industries, and how you see that playing a role in the future?
Yeah, I do. Basically, what we see on an international level is the fact that, the fact that we are in the EU has helped a lot to develop the project. So the European Union, through the CEF fund, has provided a substantial amount of subsidy to the project. And that was all due to the fact that we will enable other countries in our vicinity, as I've explained earlier today, to connect to Rotterdam and have an opportunity to store their CO2 whilst they don't have their own opportunities for storage themselves. So I think from a European perspective, there has been cooperation and collaboration in portals. And if we look at a Dutch context, I think, or at the portals context, collaboration has been key, especially on all levels where the portals project team, the public authorities and our customers needed to develop the project, both in the early phases and today still. So there's a lot of good and intensive contact across the board on all these three type of actors that are involved in the project and on all levels. And I think that that has been key in the development and in the stable development of the project over the years, that we've been really able to collaborate intensively. In the beginning of the project, there were monthly meetings between the project team, government and our customers to get it done, to basically draw this roadmap for the project and see where they all could contribute. So we as Portals project team in developing the infrastructure, the government in providing the subsidy scheme, but also in providing the permits for the storage permits and the construction permits. From the emitter side, it basically was ensuring that their capture systems were ready on time and in parallel ready with the Portals infrastructure, and that all need to be fixed, and obviously also needed to be fixed in contracts. And I think that that only could have been possible through real collaboration. So I'm very glad that we've been able to achieve that, and that we are right now constructing the project based on that. Thank
you. I think we have a few minutes left of our session, and before we turn to the participants for their questions, I wanted to come back to the topic of our panel, so the CCS projects focusing on transport and storage. And if we come back to the panel earlier this morning, where we heard that we need to speed up project development. So what would be your, like, one word, 2 words recommendation? Imagine we have people in the room, governments or project developers, like lessons learned from your previous experiences. What would you suggest? What is your recommendation? 1 or 2 words, how to move faster to develop CCS projects?
Build it. Build the infrastructure. Because there's been chicken and egg for such a long time over. You've got capture, you've got storage, we had the whole concept of the full chain that didn't really work. You've got all these sources out there. We need stores. We need confidence that the stores are going to be there. If boards, companies, it's not just true for the steel sector, I think, can look out there and see there's going to be somewhere for the CO2 to go. They know it's going to be built. We're seeing FIDs getting taken. That will give you the, I think, positive confidence that this technology is real and it's going to deliver.
2 words, policy and carbon pricing. So CCS is definitely driven by policy initiative, and we definitely need certain amount of carbon pricing. I mean, if I talk about Japan, we just introduced ETS, but the carbon pricing is very, very low. It's not gonna drive CCS deployments. And I think in Europe, we still need much more higher carbon pricing, but I'm not sure if it's good for all the industry. So I think balancing is finding balancing is very difficult, but it's a very important piece.
I'd say front-end loading needs to be done, at some scale. I hear lots of complaints that it takes too long to get a permit. Well, a lot of that is because it takes a long time to go through the subsurface process and the engineering process to actually get to that point. And yes, it's 4 to 6 to maybe even 8 in some cases years if you're dealing with an aquifer that doesn't have much data with it. And so I think we need to think about how can we invest in that early part of the portfolio cycle where actually the expenditure relative to the overall project cost is low, but you can gather lots of information earlier, you can prepare yourself and get yourself into a position where if you need to invoke a particular storage site and bring it into use, you can do it in a relatively rapid way. And then I think as well, from a regulatory perspective, regulators have a lot to do to help industry. We have lots of learnings in this space in terms of how we can make sure that projects are delivered on time. Again, you look at the oil and gas space, it's a history of delay after delay after delay on projects. We know how we can keep things to track, and that's through effective planning and making sure that everybody's clear what the requirements are. But also we need to understand that it's increasingly a complicated space where there's lots of interactions between different industries that have different regulations and different requirements, and how can we make sure that we get alignment between all those different pieces of paper that need to be issued in the process as well. So that's something that I think we need to work on to make sure that the process goes as smoothly as it possibly can. But yeah, certainly the appraisal part of the cycle, I think, is where we need to put effort in the immediate term.
Right. Thank you. Doris?
Yeah, I would recommend anyone being involved in a CCS project to really early onwards get clear who takes which responsibility. So what is your role, what's the other's role, and also recognize your strengths and your weaknesses in determining your role there, because that in the end could really speed up projects. If you do those things that you're good at and leave those things that you're not so good at to the others, then you could go well. And I would also say it takes courage, and we shouldn't handle the projects the way we always did. I think it's fine to have another approach and be a bit more innovative and do things differently than you did them before.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for excellent advice, suggestions based on your experiences. Now, let's see if there are any questions from the audience. We have a few minutes left. I see a question there.
I'll speak loudly. Just picking up on the bravery piece, it quite strikes me that the Japanese approach, where Japan seems to be almost leaping into industrialization and testing what they're doing across a wide range of different types of delivery chains, and then learning from that. That's quite ambitious and quite innovative compared to what we're doing in Europe, which is trying to make everything perfect before we start. So I'm just wondering if there's any sort of kind of comeback from the panel about that difference in approach. When you, for example, you were going, are these demonstration or are they industrial? Because it sounded like a demonstration kind of approach, but it's demonstration at industrial scale.
Right.
To learn quickly and accelerate quickly.
Yeah, good question. I think for you, Sakura.
Yeah, we have selected 7 projects, but we can consider it like as, the Netherlands has one big Artemis project, which I think 23 million tons of CO2 will be reduced by the Artemis project, right? And there are 7 projects in total, which would reduct only 13 million tons of CO2. So it's almost half of the Artemis project. So I think it's a sort of risk allocation to select 7, not only 1. And we like to involve as many industrial players to the CCS project. And it's our first milestone to kickstart the CCS, and we would like to expand the CCS hub network in future.
Right. So it seems like it's just a different approach. You're learning by doing,
Yes.
While in Europe, we get everything perfect, the regulations, all the rules, everything, and then we start. But even then, there are questions, why didn't we get specs perfect yet, or other things. So it's just maybe different mentalities, different approaches to development.
So yeah, I think it's the sort of SpaceX approach versus the NASA approach, right? That, and probably in the UK we're in the place where the Track 1 and Track 2 projects are more aligned with the NASA approach. It's like, let's sit around and try and work this out, and how's everything gonna function, right? Whereas I think we're, as Matt said earlier, we're kind of moving to more liberalised market model, and that's going to take some time for us to work out exactly how to do that properly, and we will engage with industry. But in the interim, we need to be doing things like drilling wells and gathering dynamic data, and hopefully we will see some CO2 injected into the subsurface in the UK this year in a project. So those are the sorts of things we need to be doing, and how can we make something scalable and make sure that when we have some learnings, we share them, and then we move on very, very rapidly so that we can make sure that we do things in the most effective and efficient way. But yeah, so maybe the initial projects we have are not quite, going to be replicated as we go through time. I don't think they can be, because it takes far too long and it's far too painful as well. So yeah, if industry wants to feed into how they think the future models should work in the UK, we're all ears. Yeah.
Yeah, made me also think about what Andrew said earlier about India and China and Global South, where industries are just coming up, in the pipeline that will require CCS later. Can they learn from this different experiences in Japan, in the UK, in the European Union, in the US? Yeah, so different models. Yeah, other questions? Yeah. Microphone? A working one, hopefully.
Can you hear? Okay.
Yeah.
So Nick, you mentioned about the importance of well integrity, which I presume is not only the well itself, but the plugging of the well. So I don't think there's an international global standard for the well integrity and plugging. You do have sort of a Norwegian standard, UK standard, which is most probably the strictest in the world. Now, but if you have global sort of CCS all over the world, you can have different standards, and if one country standards is low and there's an accident leakage happening, it's going to affect the whole CCS, even in the North Sea. So we have a huge risk. If that happens, there'll be a lot more public scrutiny, and things will be sort of delayed, maybe for a decade. Do you have this kind of sort of concern? And the other question I have is, so Japan wants to export, cross-border export of CO2. So as a responsible emitter, we need to make sure that the storage somewhere outside of the Japanese territory is quality, because if it is not, our reputation, the emitter's reputation goes down as well. So are there any thoughts or plans to tackle this kind of risk?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in the UK, even though we're not in the European Union, we still follow the EU directive for carbon storage. We still follow EU environmental legislation, Habitats Directive, etc. So there's the same framework that we're working to in terms of EU member states and the UK. And central to that is consideration of whether there's a significant risk of leakage. And projects will not be permitted if we think there is a significant risk of leakage. Now the question is then, from a technical point of view, how do we evaluate that? And that's why we have a stewardship process where we go through and we have stage gates and we make sure that risks are identified early, we characterize the site appropriately, we validate the project before it even then gets to the permitting stage. And through those stage gates, we should be able to identify whether there are any particular issues that need to be dealt with. Some of those legacy well issues can be dealt with through mitigation. The standards we have at the UK level, I think, will have lots and lots of similarities with other standards elsewhere in terms of best practice for carbon storage, well abandonment. What we found looking at historical wells is that where a well has been drilled and the oil and gas objective is the one that you're looking at from a storage point of view, generally speaking, the wells have been abandoned to an appropriate standard. Where it's penetrated a shallower aquifer, that's not the case. So at a very kind of high level, you can start to differentiate the robustness of the storage intervals. There's also a particular issue we have in terms of data and data availability, particularly in basins where we've had long exploration cycles and the companies that drilled the wells in the first place no longer exist, and the data wasn't necessarily collected by the national authorities. We will have some missing data. And then the question is, does that fundamentally undermine the store, or is there some other way of dealing with it? You know, can you intervene in the well? Can you mitigate some way? I was at a conference at the end of last year, which was very much subsurface geoscience focused, and there was a realization in the room at one point where you could see these light bulbs coming on and people thinking, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't be going for the depleted fields. Maybe we should be going for the aquifers. Now, that's a slightly different consideration because you may have a lower number of wells penetrating those stores, but you also have less data. And so the cycle to appraise those stores is longer, but actually it would probably give you better security of storage in the long term. And so we've got this kind of balancing act of, you know, the faster projects are the ones that are depleted fields, but in the long term, the larger capacity availability is in the aquifers, and the larger security of storage is also likely to be in the aquifers as well. And we need to be thinking about things that go beyond just CO2 leakage, but also displacement, for example, of brines into aquifers that are used for agriculture, and that's a particular issue for the onshore. But there's also displacement of oil and gas fluids as well. And all of those things could create an issue in terms of public perception if we don't get them right. So that's very much a primary concern for us. It's the top level risk in every single project we've looked at so far. So yeah, it's something that's getting a great deal of attention from us.
Okay, but you might be doing the right thing, but if it's not done somewhere else and something happens, you know, your product is going to be scrutinized a lot more than it used to be.
That's correct, yeah, and so that's why we need to be working as governments and regulators in terms of harmonisation of standards. And yeah, certainly with our European colleagues, we're talking certainly with the US. We've had one of our staff members was seconded into to Australia recently, so we are communicating. But yeah, there may be countries where things are not done to the right standard, and obviously we then need to be able to say, well, okay, that happened there, but we have different levels of standards here, and so we need to be able to demonstrate to the public why some situations are not applicable in other places. And that's sometimes a difficult argument to make, particularly when the people that you're talking to already have a pretty fixed position from a climate and environment perspective.
Yeah, I think it's an important question that you raised, and maybe it calls for closer international collaboration on integrity of CO2 storage and common standards and assurances and MRV procedures and everything that will satisfy safety criteria and so on. So important question. I think we're at the end of our session. If there are if there are other questions, we have a coffee break right now, so it's a good opportunity to talk to the speakers. I'd like to thank our panel for excellent remarks and knowledge sharing. Round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much.